April 1915, Gallipoli Peninsula, Ottoman Empire. The bullet punched through Private Tommy Wilson's skull before anyone heard the crack of the rifle. He had looked over the trench wall for exactly 2 seconds. 2 seconds to check if the water cart was coming. 2 seconds that cost him everything. His body crumpled backward into the mud, a perfect hole between his eyes still smoking in the morning air. The soldiers around him did not scream. They did not panic. They had seen this too many times already. Somewhere in the rocky hills above Anzac Cove, an invisible killer was watching, waiting, hunting. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody could see him. But he could see them. And he had just claimed his 147th victim in 3 weeks. This is the story of how a quiet Australian kangaroo farmer with no military training became the most feared sniper of World War I. A man who killed over 150 enemy soldiers without ever being seen. A ghost who changed modern warfare forever, using nothing but a standard rifle and skills he learned hunting animals in the Queensland outback. His name was Billy Singh, and in just a few months, he would turn the tide of one of history's bloodiest battles while remaining completely invisible to the enemy he was destroying. The Australian and New Zealand Army Corps had landed at Gallipoli with confidence and optimism. British commanders told them the operation would take days, perhaps a week at most. They would seize the peninsula, open the Dardanelles Strait, and knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. Simple, clean, honorable, the kind of warfare gentlemen conducted. But nothing about Gallipoli was simple or clean or honorable. The Ottomans held every advantage. They controlled the high ground, the ridges, the rocky outcrops that overlooked the narrow beach where Allied forces had landed. And from those heights, their snipers rained down death with terrifying precision. The first week was a massacre. 12 men died to sniper fire on Monday, 15 on Tuesday, 18 on Wednesday. The soldiers could not see who was shooting them. They could not hear the shots until it was too late. They could not fight back against an enemy they could not find. A man would reach up to scratch his nose and die with his hand still raised. Another would peek around a corner for half a second and fall with a bullet in his brain. One soldier tried to relieve himself behind a rock he thought was safe. He never finished. The invisible killers were everywhere and nowhere at the same time. By the end of April, 203 Allied soldiers had been killed by sniper fire in a single week. Their bodies lay rotting in the trenches, because retrieving them meant certain death for whoever tried. The smell was unbearable. The fear was worse. Men could not eat their meals without wondering if this bite would be their last. They could not sleep without nightmares of bullets they never saw coming. They could not move, could not rest, could not breathe without the constant terror of instant annihilation. The British commanders tried everything their training had taught them. They ordered massive artillery strikes on the hills. For hours, shells pounded the rocky terrain, sending explosions and dirt clouds into the sky. When the smoke cleared, the Ottoman snipers simply fired again from new positions. The shells had killed nothing but rocks. Next, the officers sent spotters with binoculars to locate enemy positions. These trained observers searched every inch of the hillside for movement, for glints of metal, for any sign of the hidden shooters. They found nothing. 2 of the spotters were killed while searching. Their expensive binoculars could not protect them from what they could not see. In desperation, commanders ordered suppressive fire. Hundreds of soldiers emptied their rifles at the hills simultaneously, shooting at shadows and bushes and anything that might hide an enemy. Thousands of bullets tore through the air. The noise was deafening. It lasted 20 minutes. When the firing stopped, 3 more Australians lay dead from Ottoman sniper rounds. The enemy had not been touched. Major General William Bridges slammed his fist on the table in his command tent. 600 men lost to snipers in a single month. His artillery was worthless. His spotters were dying. His suppressive fire was a joke. Nothing was working. Colonel James, sitting across from him, voiced what many officers believed. Sniping is not proper warfare. Gentlemen do not hide like cowards and shoot from shadows. It is murder, not combat. We should not lower ourselves to their level. Other colonels nodded in agreement. War was supposed to be fought face to face, with bayonet charges and formations and flags. Hiding behind rocks and picking off individual soldiers seemed cowardly, dishonorable, beneath the dignity of the British Empire. But the men dying in the trenches did not care about honor or dignity. They cared about surviving until tomorrow. Among those desperate soldiers sat a quiet young man named Billy Singh. He did not look like someone who would change anything. He was short and lean, with dark hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything while revealing nothing. His mother was Chinese. His father was English. He had grown up on a farm in rural Queensland, about as far from military glory as a person could get. Before the war, nobody in the British Army would have looked at him twice. He was just another colonial recruit with a standard rifle and no formal training. But Billy Singh had something the colonels and generals did not understand. He had spent his entire life hunting kangaroos in the Australian outback. He knew how to stay perfectly still for 15 hours under a blazing sun without moving a single muscle. He knew how to read the land, to use every rock and bush and shadow for concealment. He knew that the best hunter was the one his prey never saw coming. In the scrubland back home, he could track a kangaroo across 5 miles of rough terrain. He could predict where an animal would move before it moved. He could hit a target at 400 yards with nothing but iron sights and steady hands. Billy sat in the trench and watched his fellow soldiers firing blindly at the hills. He watched the artillery accomplish nothing. He watched good men die because the enemy was invisible and they were not. And something clicked in his mind. This was not a job for artillery or bayonet charges. This was a job for a hunter. The rocky terrain of Gallipoli reminded him of Queensland. The scattered vegetation, the rough ground, the endless places to hide. He had spent 23 years learning to disappear in country exactly like this. The Ottoman snipers were deadly because they were invisible. Billy realized he could be invisible too. He did not ask permission from the officers. He did not submit a formal request through proper channels. He simply decided to become what the situation required. A ghost. A hunter. An assassin who would fight shadows with shadows. On the morning of May 3rd, Billy took his standard Lee Enfield rifle and inspected every component. The weapon was nothing special. Every soldier in the Allied forces carried the same model. But Billy chose the one with the smoothest trigger pull and the cleanest barrel. He tested the sights 3 times to ensure they were perfectly aligned. Then he gathered rocks. For 2 days, Billy built his hunting position in a spot 350 yards from the Ottoman trenches. Not too close, not too far, just the right distance where his rifle could hit accurately, but the enemy could not see him clearly. He stacked flat stones in a low wall that looked like natural rubble. He wove scrub brush between the rocks until his hide matched the surrounding hillside exactly. He created a tiny opening, just wide enough for his rifle barrel. From the outside, it looked like another pile of stones on a hillside, covered with stones. Nothing special, nothing worth noticing. Inside his hide, Billy could lie flat on his stomach for hours without moving. He practiced controlling his breathing, slow and steady, in and out, until his heartbeat became a metronome. He studied the rhythm of the enemy trenches. Ottoman soldiers appeared at predictable times. Water delivery at 6 in the morning. Shift change at noon. Evening meal at 7. They followed patterns, just like the kangaroos followed trails back home. Billy memorized those patterns. He learned them the way a hunter learns the habits of his prey. On May 5th, Billy took his first shot. An Ottoman soldier stood up to pass a water bucket to another man. The distance was 362 yards. Billy had already calculated the wind. He had already adjusted for the slight uphill angle. He squeezed the trigger slowly, gently, the way his father had taught him when he was 8 years old. The rifle cracked once. The Ottoman soldier fell and did not get up. Billy did not celebrate. He did not move. He stayed frozen in his hide for 3 more hours while the enemy fired randomly at the hillside, their bullets striking rocks 50 yards away from his actual position. They had no idea where the shot came from. When darkness fell, Billy crawled silently back to the Allied trenches. The next morning, he was in position before sunrise. He killed 2 more men that day, one at 340 yards, one at 395. Both died instantly. Both times, the Ottomans fired blindly in the wrong direction. On the third day, Billy killed 3 more. The enemy soldiers in that section stopped standing up. They stopped passing supplies openly. They started moving only at night. After 12 days, Billy had 12 confirmed kills, and something remarkable happened. The casualty rate in his sector dropped. Men who had been dying at a rate of 15 per week were now losing only 2. Other sections of the trench were still hemorrhaging soldiers to Ottoman snipers. But where Billy hunted, Australians could eat their meals in peace. They could move around without expecting instant death. They could sleep without the constant terror that had haunted them for weeks. Major General Bridges heard about the quiet private who was getting results. He called Billy to his tent and asked how he was doing it. Billy explained in simple words: find good ground, stay invisible, be patient, shoot straight. Bridges listened carefully. This was not the gentlemanly warfare Colonel James had demanded, but it was working. And in war, results matter more than tradition. On May 28th, Bridges assigned a spotter named Tom Sheehan to work full-time with Billy. Tom had excellent eyesight and a salvaged periscope. His job was to find targets and calculate distances while Billy aimed. Together, they became a 2-man hunting team that would change the course of the Gallipoli campaign. Within their first month working together, Billy and Tom achieved 40 confirmed kills. Every shot between 300 and 400 yards. Every target dead without ever seeing who fired. And not once did the Ottomans locate Billy's position. He was a ghost, invisible, untouchable, deadly beyond anything the enemy had encountered. But the Ottoman commanders were not fools. They had noticed that one sector of their trench suffered far worse casualties than others. They had lost some of their best soldiers to an enemy they could not find. And they had a solution. In late August, they brought in their most feared sniper to hunt the hunter. His name was Abdul the Terrible. He had over 90 confirmed kills. He had never failed to eliminate an enemy shooter. His mission was simple: find the ghost, kill the invisible Australian, stop the bleeding. The deadliest sniper duel of World War I was about to begin, and only one man would walk away alive. Billy Singh had become the deadliest hunter on the Gallipoli Peninsula. 40 confirmed kills in 30 days. An entire sector of Ottoman trenches paralyzed with fear. Allied soldiers who had lived in constant terror could now move freely in the areas he protected. But success brought attention, and attention brought enemies from both sides of the battlefield. The Ottoman Empire had sent Abdul the Terrible to hunt the ghost. 90 kills against Russian forces, 37 enemy snipers eliminated. A legend who had never failed to find and destroy his target. But Billy Singh faced another enemy just as dangerous. The British officers who believed that what he was doing was wrong. Colonel James stood before Major General Bridges in the command tent, his face red with anger. "This Singh character is making a mockery of proper military conduct. He hides like a coward and shoots men who cannot defend themselves. If we encourage this behavior, we become no better than common murderers. I demand that you reassign him to regular infantry duties immediately." Other officers nodded in agreement. They had fought in wars where men faced each other with honor, where cavalry charged and infantry formed lines, where victory came through courage, not concealment. The idea of a soldier crawling through rocks and killing from shadows disgusted them. Bridges listened without expression. He had the casualty reports on his desk. 600 men dead from sniper fire in 1 month. Except in Billy's sector. Only 14 deaths there in the same period. The numbers did not lie. But the colonel had powerful friends in London. His family had produced generals for 3 generations. His opinion carried weight that facts alone could not overcome. "If you continue to support this unorthodox approach," Colonel James continued, "I will be forced to report my concerns to High Command. There are standards that must be maintained. The reputation of the British Army is at stake. We cannot win this war by becoming savages." Bridges made his decision. He would not stop Billy Singh. But he could not openly support him either. Billy would continue his work, but without official recognition, without additional resources, without protection if something went wrong. He was on his own. The news reached Billy through Tom Sheehan. The spotter found him in his hide before dawn, crawling through the rocks with a grim expression. "They want to shut you down. Colonel James is calling you an assassin. He says what you do is murder, not warfare." Billy did not respond. He was watching the Ottoman trenches through his rifle scope. A soldier had appeared near the water station. 370 yards. Light wind from the east. Billy made tiny adjustments to his aim. "Did you hear me?" Tom whispered. "They might pull you off the line, force you back to regular duties. Watching you dig trenches, while good men die because nobody else can do what you do." Billy squeezed the trigger. The Ottoman soldier fell. Tom watched through the periscope as the enemy scrambled for cover, firing blindly in the wrong direction. 41, Billy said quietly. "That is all that matters." But Abdul the Terrible was watching. He had studied the patterns of Allied deaths in the Ottoman trenches. He had identified which sector lost the most men. He had calculated approximately where the primary shooter must be operating from. For 3 days, Abdul had observed the hillside through his scope, searching for any sign of the invisible hunter. He saw nothing, just rocks and scrub brush. No movement, no glints of metal, no disturbed earth. This opponent was skilled. Perhaps the most skilled enemy Abdul had ever hunted. On the 4th day, Billy killed an Ottoman soldier at 370 yards. Abdul saw it. A tiny puff of smoke that lasted less than a second. A muzzle flash so brief that most observers would have missed it entirely. But Abdul was not most observers. He had been hunting enemy snipers for 3 years. He knew what to look for. He marked the location in his mind and waited. The next morning, Abdul aimed at the exact spot where he had seen the flash. He waited for the ghost to fire again. Hours passed. The August sun blazed down on the rocks. Heat waves made the air shimmer and dance. Flies swarmed over bodies that had been lying in no man's land for days. The smell of death was overwhelming. Abdul ignored it all. He had waited in worse conditions. He had hunted in colder mountains and hotter deserts. Patience was his weapon as much as the rifle in his hands. Then Billy fired. Abdul saw the tiny flash again. He squeezed his trigger immediately, sending a bullet screaming toward the exact location where Billy's barrel had been. The shot struck rock with a sharp crack. Dust exploded from the impact point. Abdul watched through his scope, waiting for a body to slump forward, waiting for blood to pool on the stone. Nothing happened. Billy had moved the instant after firing. He had rolled 3 feet to the left inside his hide, a motion so smooth and practiced that it took less than 2 seconds. Abdul's bullet had hit nothing but rock. But Billy knew something had changed. That return shot had come too fast, too accurate. Someone was hunting him specifically. An expert was watching, calculating, waiting for him to make a single mistake. For the first time since landing at Gallipoli, Billy felt fear. Not the general fear that every soldier experienced under fire. This was personal. Somewhere in those hills, a man wanted him dead. A man who knew how to find invisible targets. A man who had already pinpointed his position to within a few feet. The duel between Billy Singh and Abdul the Terrible lasted 11 days. It was the most terrifying experience of Billy's life. Every time he took a shot, he knew a bullet might come back at him within seconds. Every time he moved to a new position, he wondered if Abdul was already watching that location. Every breath could be his last. Abdul fired 17 shots at Billy's suspected positions during those 11 days. He was trying to force the Australian into a mistake, trying to make him panic and reveal himself. Each bullet came closer than the last. One struck a rock 6 inches from Billy's head. Another passed through the scrub brush directly above his hide. A third actually grazed the barrel of Billy's rifle, leaving a bright scratch on the metal. Billy did not panic. He did not fire back blindly. He remembered what his father had taught him about hunting dangerous animals in the Queensland outback. When a wild boar charges at you, your instinct is to run. But running gets you killed. You have to stay calm. You have to wait for the right moment. You have to trust your skills more than your fear. Billy changed positions after every shot. He never established a pattern the enemy could predict. He watched the hillside where Abdul's shots originated, looking for any sign of movement. For 8 days, he saw nothing. Abdul was as invisible as Billy himself. On the 9th day, Billy noticed something. A tiny flicker of motion 430 yards away. It lasted less than a second. Most observers would have dismissed it as a bird or a gust of wind moving vegetation. But Billy had spent his entire life watching for exactly this kind of movement. In Queensland, a kangaroo shifting its weight could mean the difference between a successful hunt and a wasted day. He watched that spot for 3 more hours. Nothing moved. The rocks sat motionless under the blazing sun. Anyone else would have given up, would have decided they had imagined the movement. Billy waited. He had once stayed in position for 16 hours tracking a single kangaroo. 3 hours was nothing. Then he saw it again. A slight adjustment, barely visible, as Abdul shifted his rifle to a more comfortable position. The Ottoman sniper had grown tired of holding perfectly still. He had made a tiny movement to relieve his cramped muscles. It was a mistake Billy would never have made. Billy aimed carefully. 430 yards was near the maximum effective range of his standard Lee Enfield rifle. The shot would require perfect calculation of wind and distance. It would require absolute stillness at the moment of trigger pull. It would require every skill Billy had learned in 23 years of hunting. He held his breath. His heart slowed to a steady rhythm. His finger touched the trigger with gentle pressure. He did not think about Abdul, or the war, or the 11 days of terror. He thought about Queensland, about the scrubland where he had learned to shoot, about his father standing beside him, teaching him that patience was more important than speed. Billy squeezed the trigger. The bullet flew across 430 yards of hot, dusty air. It struck Abdul the Terrible directly in the forehead. The most feared sniper in the Ottoman army died without knowing who had killed him. The news spread through the Allied trenches within hours. The ghost had killed Abdul the Terrible. The hunter who had eliminated 37 enemy snipers was gone. The man the Ottomans had sent to stop the bleeding had bled out on the hillside he thought was safe. Major General Bridges called Billy to his tent that evening. The general's attitude had changed completely. "Tell me what you need," he said. "Resources, equipment, men, whatever it takes to expand what you are doing." Billy asked for 15 soldiers, men he could train in his methods, men who could protect other sections of the trench the way he had protected his sector. Bridges agreed immediately. Colonel James and his objections no longer mattered. Results had silenced the critics. For the next month, Billy taught his students everything he knew: how to build a hide that looked like natural terrain, how to judge distance by studying the landscape, how to control breathing until your body became perfectly still, how to read enemy patterns and predict when targets would appear, how to wait for hours without moving, how to think like a hunter instead of a soldier. By mid-September, Billy's 15 students were positioned across the entire Anzac line. Each one used his techniques. Each one built invisible hides. Each one practiced the patience that had made Billy deadly. The sniper casualty rate across the whole beachhead began to drop, not as dramatically as in Billy's personal sector, but enough to save dozens of lives every week. The Ottoman command grew desperate. They pulled their front trenches back 200 yards in the sectors where Billy and his students operated. They were retreating from ground they had fought to hold, giving up hard-won territory just to escape the invisible killers. The Allies gained ground without firing a single artillery shell or losing a single man in a charge. By October 1915, Billy Singh had 150 confirmed kills recorded in official documents. His spotter, Tom Sheehan, estimated the true number was closer to 200 when including shots where bodies could not be verified. 150 Ottoman soldiers had died without ever seeing who fired. 150 families would receive news that their sons or fathers or brothers had fallen to the ghost. But the Gallipoli campaign was failing. Despite Billy's success, despite the reduced casualties in his sector, the overall strategic situation had not changed. The Allies could not advance inland. They could not capture the heights. They were stuck on the beach, with winter approaching and supplies running low. In December 1915, British command made a decision that shocked everyone. The Allied forces would evacuate Gallipoli. They would abandon the beach they had fought so hard to hold. Thousands of men had died for ground that would simply be given back to the enemy. Billy Singh left with the evacuation fleet, watching the peninsula shrink into the distance. He had done everything possible. He had killed more enemy soldiers than almost anyone in the Allied forces. He had trained others to do the same. He had changed how modern armies thought about sniping, and none of it had been enough to win. But his war was not over. The British Army had plans for the ghost of Gallipoli. They were sending him to a place where the killing was even worse. a place where millions of men faced each other across muddy trenches that stretched for hundreds of miles. A place called the Western Front. And in France, Billy Singh would face challenges that made Gallipoli look simple. New terrain, new enemies, new weapons designed specifically to find and kill snipers like him. The Ottomans had sent one man to hunt Billy. The Germans would send dozens. And they would have technology that Abdul the Terrible could never have imagined. Billy Singh had killed over 150 Ottoman soldiers at Gallipoli. He had trained 15 men to use his methods. He had defeated Abdul the Terrible in the deadliest sniper duel of the campaign. He had proven that a quiet farmer from Queensland could change the rules of modern warfare. But Gallipoli was over. The beaches were abandoned. The dead were left behind. And now, the ghost was being sent to hell on earth. The Western Front stretched for 470 miles across France and Belgium. Millions of soldiers faced each other across a wasteland of mud, barbed wire, and rotting corpses. Artillery shells fell like rain. Machine guns cut down entire battalions in minutes. Men lived like rats in waterlogged trenches, waiting for orders to charge into certain death. This was industrialized slaughter on a scale the world had never seen. And the Germans had snipers who made the Ottomans look like amateurs. German military intelligence had already heard about the ghost of Gallipoli. They knew an Australian sharpshooter had killed dozens of Ottoman soldiers without ever being located. They knew he had eliminated their allies' best sniper hunter. They knew he was now in France, and they were ready for him. The German army took sniping far more seriously than the British ever had. They had established formal training schools years before the war began. Their marksmen used custom rifles with precision optics manufactured by Zeiss and Voigtlander. They had telescopic sights that could identify targets at 800 yards. They had specialized camouflage suits designed by professional hunters. They had periscope rifles that allowed them to shoot without exposing any part of their body above the trench. When Billy arrived at the Somme in early 1916, he realized immediately that everything had changed. His first day in the trenches, he watched a British soldier get shot through the head by a sniper over 600 yards away. The German had used a scope so powerful he could see the expression on his victim's face. Billy's standard Lee Enfield with iron sights suddenly felt like a toy. The German snipers worked in coordinated teams. They communicated through coded signals. They rotated positions according to mathematical schedules designed to prevent pattern recognition. They had armored plates with tiny shooting holes that made them nearly invulnerable to return fire. One German sniper, named Helmut Wagner, had already killed over 200 British soldiers. He was called the Reaper of Verdun, and he had specifically requested to be transferred to the sector where the Australian Ghost was operating. Within his first week in France, Billy lost 2 of the men he had trained at Gallipoli. Both were killed by German snipers, using techniques far more sophisticated than anything the Ottomans had employed. The student who had shown the most promise, a young man named Jack Davies from Melbourne, was shot through the eye while building a hide. The Germans had spotted his position using aerial reconnaissance photographs and waited 3 days for him to return to it. Billy had never faced aerial surveillance before. At Gallipoli, there were no airplanes constantly photographing the battlefield. Here, German observation planes flew over the trenches every morning. They took pictures that revealed disturbed earth, unusual shadows, anything that might indicate a sniper position. The Germans studied these photographs with magnifying glasses and mapped every suspicious location. Then, they sent their own marksmen to those exact spots. The rules had changed. The skills that had made Billy invisible at Gallipoli were no longer enough. He needed to adapt or die. For 3 weeks, Billy did not fire a single shot. He watched, He studied. He learned. He observed how the German snipers operated, how they chose positions, how they avoided the same detection techniques he had used against the Ottomans. He examined the bodies of fallen German marksmen and catalogued their equipment. He measured the angles of their shooting holes. He analyzed their camouflage materials. The British officers grew impatient. Colonel Harrison summoned Billy to his dugout and demanded results. "I brought you here because they said you were the best. So far, I have seen nothing. My men are dying every day, and you sit in the trenches watching. Either start killing Germans, or I will send you back to the infantry, where you can die with everyone else." Billy asked for two things: a telescopic sight salvaged from a captured German rifle, and permission to operate outside the normal chain of command. Harrison laughed. "You want a German scope? We have none to spare, and every soldier in this army follows orders. Who do you think you are?" But Billy had an ally. Major Thomas Caldwell had read the reports from Gallipoli. He had studied Billy's techniques and understood their potential. He arranged for a captured Zeiss scope to be delivered from a supply depot in Amiens. He convinced Harrison to give Billy a 2-week trial period with no interference. Billy spent 4 days modifying his rifle to accept the German optic. The scope was designed for a different weapon, but Billy had grown up repairing farm equipment in Queensland. He machined an adapter bracket from scrap metal. He zeroed the sight with obsessive precision, firing dozens of test rounds until the point of aim matched the point of impact at 300, 400, and 500 yards. Then he disappeared. For 11 days, nobody in the British trenches saw Billy sing. He had moved into no man's land, the hellish wasteland between the armies. He built a hide in a shell crater 60 yards from the German lines. He covered himself with mud and debris until he looked like another corpse among the thousands rotting in the poisoned earth. He did not eat hot food. He did not light cigarettes. He did not move during daylight hours. On the 12th day, Billy killed Helmut Wagner. The Reaper of Verdun was adjusting his position behind an armored plate when Billy fired through the narrow shooting hole from an angle the German had thought impossible. The bullet entered Wagner's left eye and exited the back of his skull. He had killed over 200 men. Now he was just another body in the mud. The Germans could not understand what had happened. Their best sniper had been shot through an opening less than 3 inches wide from a position they could not locate. They launched artillery strikes at every suspicious location within 600 yards of Wagner's position. They sent reconnaissance teams into no man's land to search for the shooter. They found nothing. Billy had already moved. He was 200 yards away in a new hide, watching the German search parties through his captured scope. He killed 3 more men that day. Each shot came from a different position. Each victim died without knowing they were targeted. The psychological impact was devastating. German soldiers in that sector stopped using their observation posts. They stopped moving along their trenches during daylight. They stopped sending repair teams to fix damaged wire. The mere possibility of the invisible Australian being nearby was enough to paralyze an entire kilometer of front line. British intelligence noticed the change immediately. Aerial photographs showed German trenches with no visible activity for days at a time. Listening posts reported conversations about a demon who could shoot through steel. Prisoners captured in raids spoke fearfully of the ghost who had followed them from Turkey. By April 1916, Billy had confirmed kills on 47 German soldiers in France. His students, now equipped with similar captured optics and trained in his new techniques, added another 63. The total German casualties from Australian snipers in Billy's sector exceeded 100 in 3 months. The British casualty rate from enemy sniper fire dropped by 52%. But the war showed no mercy to anyone. On June 28, 1916, A German artillery shell exploded 15 feet from Billy's position. He was not in his hide at the time. He was crawling back to the British trenches after a successful engagement. The blast threw him 20 feet through the air. Shrapnel tore through his left shoulder, his chest, and his arm. Tom Sheehan found him lying in a crater filled with muddy water. Billy was barely conscious, his uniform soaked with blood. Tom dragged him across 200 yards of shell-torn ground while machine gun fire cracked overhead. 3 times they had to stop and hide in craters while flares lit up the night sky. 3 times Tom thought Billy had died in his arms. The doctors saved his life, but they could not save his career. The shrapnel had damaged nerves in Billy's shoulder that controlled fine motor movement in his fingers. He could still grip a rifle, but he could no longer hold it perfectly steady. The microscopic tremor that now affected his hands made precision shooting impossible. At 300 yards, his bullets landed within a 6-inch circle instead of a single point. For infantry work, that would have been acceptable. For sniping, it was the end. Billy Singh was evacuated to a hospital in England. He spent 8 months recovering from his wounds. He watched from a bed while the Battle of the Somme killed 420,000 British soldiers. He read reports of his students continuing his work, adapting his techniques, training new generations of snipers. The methods he had developed were being written into official military manuals. The skills he had learned hunting kangaroos in Queensland were becoming standard doctrine for armies around the world. In November 1918, the war finally ended. Billy sailed back to Australia with thousands of other veterans. He was 31 years old. He had killed more enemy soldiers than almost any other Allied sniper in the entire conflict. He had revolutionized how modern armies thought about concealment and marksmanship. He had saved hundreds of lives by taking them. And nobody at home had any idea who he was. The Australian newspapers celebrated returning heroes with parades and ceremonies. They wrote stories about officers who had led cavalry charges and pilots who had shot down enemy planes. They did not write about the quiet farmer who had lain in mud for days at a time, killing men who never saw him coming. Billy did not seek attention. He did not write memoirs or give interviews. When people asked about the war, he changed the subject. When old soldiers gathered to tell stories in pubs, he sat in the corner and said nothing. The man who had terrified 2 enemy armies wanted only to disappear back into ordinary life. But ordinary life was harder than any battlefield he had faced. The skills that had kept him alive in combat made peace feel strange and dangerous. He could not sit with his back to a door. He could not sleep without waking at every sound. He could not look at a hillside without calculating sniper positions and fields of fire. The war was over, but it lived on inside his head. Billy took whatever work he could find. He labored on farms. He drove delivery trucks. He did construction jobs that left his damaged shoulder aching for days. The pay was poor and the work was hard, but he never complained. He had seen too much death to worry about discomfort. His marriage failed. The intimacy that other people found natural felt impossible to a man who had spent years trusting no one and nothing. His wife could not understand the nightmares that woke him screaming. She could not reach the parts of him that had died in the trenches of France. The years passed in quiet obscurity. While Billy struggled to pay rent and find work, military academies around the world studied his techniques. British instructors taught young soldiers about the importance of patience and concealment. American officers analyzed his fieldcraft for lessons that could be applied in future wars. The ghost of Gallipoli had become a textbook case study, even as the man himself was forgotten. On May 19, 1943, Billy Singh died in a home for elderly soldiers in Brisbane. He was 57 years old. His death received only a small notice in the local newspaper. No crowds attended his funeral. No military honors were given. The man who had killed 150 enemy soldiers and changed warfare forever was buried in a simple grave with few mourners. But what happened to Billy Singh after his death reveals something even more remarkable about his legacy. Something that most people have never heard. Something that connects a Queensland kangaroo farmer to soldiers fighting in jungles and deserts and mountains around the world, even today. The final chapter of this story is not about killing. It is about what survives when a man is gone. It is about how one person's ideas can echo through history long after their name is forgotten. And it begins with a question that Billy Singh never asked himself, but that the world would answer for him. What does it mean to be remembered? Billy Singh had accomplished what seemed impossible. A kangaroo farmer from Queensland, with no formal military training, had killed over 150 enemy soldiers across 2 continents. He had defeated Abdul the Terrible in the deadliest sniper duel of Gallipoli. He had adapted his techniques to overcome German technology on the Western Front. He had trained dozens of soldiers who saved thousands of lives. He had revolutionized how modern armies thought about concealment, patience, and precision killing. But when the guns finally fell silent in November 1918, Billy Singh came home to a country that had no idea who he was. The Australian newspapers celebrated returning heroes with parades and ceremonies. They wrote glowing stories about cavalry officers and fighter pilots. They published photographs of generals shaking hands with politicians. They did not write about the quiet man who had spent years lying in mud and filth, killing enemies who never saw his face. Sniping was still considered dishonorable by many. The work Billy had done was effective, but it was not the kind of warfare that made for inspiring headlines. Billy returned to Queensland and tried to rebuild the life he had left behind 4 years earlier. The farm where he had learned to hunt kangaroos was gone, sold to pay debts while he was away fighting. His father had died during the war. His mother lived alone in a small house in Brisbane. Billy moved in with her and looked for work. The jobs were hard to find and harder to keep. Billy's damaged shoulder made physical labor painful. The shrapnel wounds that had ended his sniping career left him with constant aches that grew worse in cold weather. He worked on farms when he could, hauling equipment and mending fences. He drove delivery trucks through dusty Queensland roads. He took construction jobs that left him exhausted and hurting. The pay was never enough. But the physical challenges were nothing compared to what was happening inside his mind. Billy could not escape the war. He woke every night from dreams of trenches and shell craters and men falling dead from bullets they never saw. He could not sit in a room without calculating the angles of fire from every window. He could not walk down a street without scanning rooftops for potential sniper positions. The skills that had kept him alive in combat now made ordinary life feel like a constant threat. His marriage lasted less than 3 years. Billy had met a woman named Elizabeth shortly after returning home. She was kind and patient, but she could not understand the man who woke up screaming in the darkness. She could not reach the parts of Billy that had died somewhere between Gallipoli and the Somme. When she finally left, Billy did not blame her. He knew he was broken in ways that could not be fixed. The years passed in quiet poverty. Billy moved from job to job, from boarding house to boarding house. He never complained. He never talked about what he had done during the war. When other veterans gathered to share stories and memories, Billy sat in the corner and said nothing. The man who had been called a ghost by 2 enemy armies wanted only to disappear completely. Meanwhile, the methods he had developed were spreading around the world. British military instructors studied his techniques and incorporated them into official training manuals. American officers analyzed reports from Gallipoli and France, extracting lessons about concealment and patience that would shape their own sniper programs. Even the Germans, who had once hunted Billy with their best marksmen, acknowledged that the Australian ghost had introduced innovations they needed to understand. The principles Billy had learned hunting kangaroos became the foundation of modern sniper doctrine. Stay invisible. Study the terrain. Learn enemy patterns. Wait for the perfect shot. Never fire twice from the same position. These ideas seem obvious today, but in 1915 they were revolutionary. British commanders had believed that hiding and shooting from concealment was cowardly. Billy proved it was effective. His success forced military thinkers to reconsider centuries of assumptions about honorable warfare. By the 1930s, every major military power had established formal sniper training programs based on techniques Billy had pioneered. The British Army taught new recruits about fieldcraft and concealment, using examples from Gallipoli. The American military studied his methods of building natural hides and reading enemy behavior. The Soviet Union, which would later produce some of history's deadliest snipers, incorporated his principles of patience and invisibility into their training doctrine. But Billy Singh knew nothing of this legacy. He was too busy surviving to pay attention to military journals and training manuals. He did not know that instructors on 3 continents were teaching his techniques to new generations of soldiers. He did not know that the skills he had learned hunting animals in the Queensland outback were being passed down through military academies in Britain, America, Germany, and the Soviet Union. On May 19, 1943, Billy Singh died in the Kiumba Eventide home for elderly soldiers in Brisbane. He was 57 years old. The official cause was heart disease, complicated by his old war wounds. The shrapnel he had carried in his body for 27 years had finally finished what the Germans started on that June day in 1916. His death received a small notice in the local newspaper. A few sentences about a veteran who had served at Gallipoli and France. No mention of his confirmed kills. No mention of Abdul the Terrible. No mention of the methods that were revolutionizing military training around the world. Billy Singh was buried in Lutwyche Cemetery with a simple headstone that gave his name, his dates, and his rank. Private, the lowest rank in the army. The rank he had held when he killed more enemy soldiers than most generals. But the story of Billy Singh's influence was only beginning. The true measure of his legacy would not become clear until decades after his death, when the methods he pioneered saved lives in conflicts he never imagined. During the Korean War, American snipers used techniques directly descended from Billy's innovations. They built hides that blended with the terrain. They studied enemy patrol patterns. They practiced the patience that Billy had learned hunting kangaroos in Queensland. In the frozen mountains of Korea, soldiers who had never heard of Billy Singh were using his methods to protect their units from enemy fire. In Vietnam, Australian snipers carried forward the traditions that Billy had established. They operated in jungle terrain that would have been familiar to a Queensland hunter. They used concealment and patience to neutralize enemy threats. They saved countless lives by eliminating threats that conventional forces could not reach. One Australian sniper in Vietnam, a man named Ian Robertson, later wrote that everything he knew about fieldcraft came from techniques developed during World War I. He did not know he was describing Billy Singh's legacy. The methods continued to evolve through the Gulf War, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Modern military snipers use technology that Billy could never have imagined. Thermal scopes that can see through darkness, rangefinders that calculate distance to the millimeter, rifles that can hit targets at 2,000 yards. But the fundamental principles remain the same. Stay invisible. Study the terrain. Learn enemy patterns. Wait for the perfect shot. Never establish predictable routines. Today, military training programs around the world still teach what instructors call the SING principles, though many of them no longer know where the name comes from. The quiet farmer from Queensland, who wanted only to be forgotten, has influenced how soldiers fight on every continent. His ideas have saved thousands of lives over the past century. His methods have been refined and improved, but the core concepts remain exactly what Billy learned hunting kangaroos in the Australian outback. The lesson of Billy Singh's story extends far beyond military tactics. It is a lesson about innovation and where good ideas come from. The British officers at Gallipoli thought they knew how to fight. They had been trained at prestigious military academies. They had studied the campaigns of Napoleon and Wellington. They believed that war should be conducted according to honorable rules the gentlemen had followed for centuries. And they were losing. Billy Singh had no formal education. He had never studied military theory. He had never read books about tactics or strategy. He was just a farmer who knew how to hunt. But he saw something the colonels could not see. He recognized that the terrain of Gallipoli was similar to the terrain of Queensland. He understood that the same patience and concealment that worked against kangaroos would work against human enemies. He had the wisdom to apply skills from one domain to a completely different situation. This is how real innovation happens, not in research laboratories or conference rooms, but in the minds of people who see connections that others miss. The best ideas often come from outsiders who are not bound by conventional thinking. Billy Singh changed warfare because he did not know he was supposed to follow the old rules. He simply did what worked. History is full of similar examples. During World War II, a civilian scientist named Barnes Wallis invented bouncing bombs that destroyed German dams because he thought about the problem differently than military engineers. A group of Native American soldiers became unbreakable code talkers because their language was something the enemy had never encountered. A mechanic named Kelly Johnson designed aircraft that seemed impossible because he ignored the rules that said they could not be built. The people who change the world are rarely the ones we expect. They are farmers and mechanics and outsiders who see what the experts cannot see. They are the ones who try crazy ideas that everyone else dismisses as impossible. They are the quiet ones who do not seek recognition, but simply do what needs to be done. There is one final detail about Billy Singh that most people do not know. It was discovered only recently, buried in military archives that have been classified for decades. In 1942, 1 year before Billy died, the Australian Army sent a representative to interview him. They were preparing for war in the Pacific and wanted to capture his knowledge before it was lost forever. A young lieutenant spent 3 days with Billy in the veterans' home, recording everything the old sniper could remember about his techniques and experiences. Those interviews filled over 200 pages of transcripts. They contain detailed descriptions of how Billy built his hides, how he calculated distances, how he predicted enemy behavior, how he controlled his breathing and his fear. They contained his thoughts on patience and discipline and the psychological burden of killing men who never saw you coming. The transcripts were classified and filed away. They were used to train Australian snipers during World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. They influenced doctrine that spread to allied nations around the world. But they were never published. Billy Singh never knew that his words would continue teaching soldiers for generations after his death. The transcripts were finally declassified in 2008. For the first time, historians could read Billy's own account of what he had done and how he had done it. They discovered a man who was thoughtful and humble, who took no pleasure in killing, but understood its necessity. They discovered a hunter who had simply applied the skills of his youth to the deadliest work imaginable. In those transcripts, Billy was asked what he wanted people to remember about him. His answer was simple: "I just did my job. Other men were braver. Other men sacrificed more. I had a skill, and I used it. That is all." But that is not all. Billy Singh proved that innovation can come from anywhere. He proved that the most important skills are often the ones we learn outside formal education. He proved that patience and observation and quiet determination can overcome technology and tradition and the certainty of experts. From a kangaroo farmer with a standard rifle to 150 confirmed kills. From a man dismissed as unsuitable for command to the architect of modern sniper doctrine. From a soldier who wanted only to be forgotten to a legacy that has saved thousands of lives across a century of conflict. Billy Singh showed us that the deadliest warriors are not always the ones who make the most noise. Sometimes they are the quiet ones, the patient ones, the invisible ones, the hunters who change the world and then disappear back into ordinary life, content to let their work speak louder than their names ever could. If you know similar stories of forgotten heroes who changed history, share them in the comments. These voices deserve to be heard. And if you want to discover more untold stories from military history, subscribe to join us on this journey. Because somewhere in the archives, in the dusty files and classified documents, there are hundreds more stories like this one. Stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things. Stories that prove the most powerful weapon in any war is not technology or numbers or tradition. It is the human mind. And sometimes, the minds that matter most belong to people that nobody expected.